Welcome to another episode of Payments Pros, a Troutman Pepper Locke podcast focusing on the highly regulated and ever-evolving payment processing industry. This podcast features insights from members of our fintech and payments practice, as well as guest commentary from business leaders and regulatory experts in the payments industry. I'm Carlin McCrory, one of the hosts of the podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, let me remind you to visit and subscribe to our blog, troutmanfinancialservices.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts on troutman.com/podcasts. We have episodes that focus on trends that drive enforcement activity, digital assets, consumer financial services, and more. Make sure to subscribe to hear the latest episodes. Today, I'm joined by Melissa Sneed from the Georgia Department of Banking and James Stevens, co-leader of the firm's Financial Services Industry Group, to discuss Merchant Acquirer Limited Purpose Bank Charters, or MALPs as we like to call them around here. Melissa, the Deputy Commissioner for Supervision at the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance, has held the role since 2016 and has been with the department for over 2 decades. In her role, Melissa oversees all Georgia state-chartered financial institutions, including banks, credit unions, holding companies, and non-depository trust companies. James and Melissa, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Okay, Melissa, I'll start it off with you. Can you describe the application process to obtain the MALP charter?
Yes, thank you so much. And I think everyone has a different view on how to say the name. And so it's a mouthful. At our department, we call it the MALPB. So that's what I'll go with for our use of the term. But when you step back and you think about what the department does, we are very familiar with de novo bank charters. And so our MALPB chartering process is really based off that foundation. Our full application and the procedures and guidelines for applying are on our website, so they can be pulled at any time by anybody. And the application itself is very expansive. It does cover all facets of financials, merchant processing, BSA, IT, management, audit, compliance, the whole gamut of areas that we want to review. And we have to find favorable on the following factors when we are looking at an application. We have to find favorable on financial structure and business plan, capital structure and safeguards, management. And management's very inclusive to also include compliance structures like BSA, audit. And also from a regulatory standpoint, there's 3 officers that have to be identified and roles that have to be met. And they are the role of Chief Executive Officer, Chief Risk Officer, and Chief Information Officer. And the only caveat with those is that our CEO cannot be the Chief Risk Officer. We also have to find favorable on information technology systems and data security, on affiliates and organizers. So when we look at the entity, we look up and down and side to side for a holding company, for affiliates, anything that would touch this entity. We look into all of that. And then the final one is the number of Georgia employees, because that's baked into the law. And just to kind of walk through the timeline for that, for the 2 applications that we've accepted, we took about 6 months in the review period to get to a place to accept those applications. And in that 6-month period, we are sending back and having considerable questions, conversations, collaboration with the applicant to truly understand their business model, their policies and oversight, their management, holding company board structures, their capitalization plans, and their compliance with laws and rules that go along with this entity. By rule, once we've accepted it, we have 90 days to make a decision on that application. Now, we can extend that 90 days if we do need further information. There's no automatic approval or denial at the end of that 90-day period, but we do try very hard to meet those 90 days. After that 90-day, if we do decide to grant approval for those applicants, it would be a conditional approval. So we would issue a lot of things that they would have to meet in order to be able to begin operations. And then some of those conditions would also extend through the life of the 3-year de novo period. So those 3 years are going to have conditions on those, such as minimum capital levels, pre-approval for any changes on shareholders, directors of those entities. And that MALPB would have to operate within the parameters of the business model that was proposed and approved for the first 3 years of operations and have any prior approval for significant change in plans. It's very much like we do in a de novo bank scenario.
Thanks, Melissa. And James, do you want to describe the application process from the applicant standpoint as well?
I am happy to do that. Before I do that, though, let me say that there's a third pronunciation that's in the market, and that's MALPB. So we've got the MALPB, which is the DBF's very long-winded way of referring to this. There's the MALPB, which has 2 consonants for some reason. And then there's our preferred approach, which I'm going to use, which is the silent B, MALP with the silent B. So I'm just going to call it a MALP as well. Yeah, I think that the big thing that I would say is that the thing that we recommend to people that we are talking to about these charters is really to spend a lot of time on the front end before we even get to the stage of sending a package to Melissa and her staff at the DBF. When you create a bank, a state bank like this, even if you are in the payments business, which everybody that is applying for these charters is already very substantial payments companies, they have not created necessarily, they may have, but they probably have not created, and certainly not at this new bank, proposed bank level, all of the policies and procedures that need to be had under the statute, the regulation, and the guidelines here in Georgia. And that preparing those policies and procedures, thinking through the organizational structure, the personnel, any kind of intercompany relationships that are going to be in place between the new bank charter and the rest of the existing payments companies organization. All of that stuff, in our opinion, should be done way before we get in front of the DBF. And I think what we've seen with the DBF so far is they are going to stick to that 90-day time limit that Melissa described. And the way that they do that is they are going to take a long period of time to accept the application so that they can meet that objective. And so what we've seen, I think, anecdotally from the sidelines is we've seen people trying to do some of that work on policies and procedures and personnel and org charts during that process where they have an application on file with the DBF. And I think that my suggestion would be to do more of that before you get on file so that you can shrink the period of time between sending that package to the DBF and it being accepted and then ultimately approved. So that would be one thing that we stress. And a lot of that is consulting work. Maybe not consulting work is the right way to describe it, but it's not legal. We may have a role from a legal standpoint in helping think through issues, but drafting capital policies and liquidity policies and risk policies and thinking about staffing and how you're going to utilize expertise throughout an existing organization to provide support. A lot of that is work that has to be done inside the business or by getting the expertise of outside consultants. And so we think that that's a critical part of this as well, is to not only engage your lawyer, engage Troutman or whoever might be your lawyer to work on the project, but also to get really good help as needed on the consulting front so you can spend months working on a project before you get in front of the DBF with an application. Once you get that application on file, my experience having formed a number of banks with the DBF is they absolutely are going to hit the deadlines that they have. And they're going to work with the applicant back and forth, lots of communication. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion. It needs to be a priority for our clients that are applying. This can't be something that somebody's doing as a side gig to their normal job. We need somebody that's really focused and responsive to the regulator because that's the expectation. And that's how we can keep the project on file. But yeah, I think that, at the end of the day, we've only seen one go all the way through. And so I think that, the process is still getting developed both by the department as well as the people like us that are seeking to have charters. And so there's going to continue to be a process that evolves, and every project is going to continue to be a little unique forever, but also as those processes get refined and defined. But I think that, that would be the biggest thing that we would stress, is to really make a substantial investment in time and planning before you get in front of Melissa and her staff.
Thanks, James. And Melissa, I'll kind of kick it back over to you for this one. Can you describe the ongoing examination oversight of the MALPB?
Sure. I'll start by really agreeing with James that, this is new and we're learning and developing and streamlining and refining as we go along as well. So it is definitely a two-way street, and that engagement with both parties is so important. It's been a really effective process so far. So I take it from application acceptance and approval, and everything conditionally gets addressed, and then we give the permit to begin business. And so that would take us into the process of ongoing examination and oversight. So how this entity lives once it's up on its legs and operational. And so from a regulatory standpoint, we have developed a program that is going to combine on-site monitoring and off-site monitoring. And again, it goes back to our foundational approach in being primarily bank regulators, credit union regulators as well, but we kind of put that hat on as we developed our examination program. And so to talk about those two areas specifically, our off-site monitoring work is going to include an ongoing review. And what we're really going to be looking at is quarterly call report submissions. Just a quick comment on that. Per our rules, there is a quarterly call report. We have customized and developed that for this specific charter, and those reports have to come to the department, be filed on a quarterly basis. In addition, the rules also call for an annual attestation report, and we've developed that customized annual report as well. So that gets reported in from the entity. And then as part of those ongoing requirements, at least for the first 3 years of operations, we'll also look at those monthly board reports and packages and be watching those off-site. And then the other part of ongoing supervision is our on-site approach. And really for our on-site examination modeling, we have taken a page out of our large bank program oversight. So what we'll have is a dedicated central point of contact for each of these MALPBs, especially the larger ones. And we will develop annually a risk-focused examination program. So on a quarterly basis, per the program that we've spilled out at the end of one year to begin the beginning of next, quarterly we will do targeted reviews. And those could be anything from a BSA target, an IT target, an onboarding, financial analysis, complaints, have you, as we see targeted risks throughout the entities. So quarterly we will be on site doing a targeted review of a defined area. And then we will put together a letter, each of those targeted reviews, so ongoing communication really being key. And at the end of each year, we will do a roll-up annual report. So we'll take everything that we looked at from the whole year and also look each year at financials and other areas so that we can assign ratings. And just a comment on ratings is that we have also developed a customized rating system for the MALPB. And so we really leaned into this thinking about rating systems that already exist in CAMELS, MOICA, ROCA, RFI ratings. And we've customized it for the areas that should cover the MALPB, which would cover areas like financial condition, management and the board, affiliates, subsidiaries, holding companies, compliance. And then, of course, operations, internal controls, protection of merchant funds, audits. So it covers those areas. We would issue those component ratings as well as a composite. And that really models off the existing rating system of 1 to 5. We also will assign a BSA rating and an IT rating, just like we would do in our banking world. A note on here too that FinCEN did confirm that this charter qualifies under their definition of a bank. So all BSA related regulations fall to these entities just as they would to an FDIC insured bank. So that's how we would look at the on-site portion of ongoing monitoring for these institutions.
Well, thanks, Melissa, for that. James, Melissa, any other thoughts on the charter?
I'll just add another piece that we have been spending some time on lately, and it's just another thing for applicants to get in front of and think about. Obviously, interacting with the card networks is critical. If you don't have that interaction going and you're not getting good signs, that there may not be a purpose of going forward with this charter. But I'll just highlight that with this charter type, the regulators, they do have some unique requirements, one of which is that the bank is supposed to establish a special purpose entity that's a subsidiary of the bank to hold merchant funds and deliver to the card networks a non-consolidation opinion from legal counsel that gives comfort to the network that in the event that the bank were to go insolvent, that those merchant funds would be made available to the merchant. So it's a unique charter. There are some unique rules and some guidelines that the card networks have put out. And so I would say that in that planning phase that I described earlier, it's really important that you learn about what's required from the card networks and get in front of that and make sure that there's not any impediments to your ability to operate not only in compliance with the law and the regulations applicable to the MALP under Georgia law, but also those critical card network rules.
I think that's an excellent point. And we have really been working closely with the card networks now for several years as the initial entities started to express interest. We agree 100%. The only way that this whole charter works is to have the card networks on board with the department. And we have sharing agreements, both between us and the card network, and then a tri-party sharing agreement with the entities that are applying in the card network so that we can all be engaged and as lockstep as we possibly can. But it is critical that the card networks buy into the applicants' desire to be in the space, or the charter will not be able to be used to actually process if the processors on the back end aren't open and willing to also make some conditional approvals for this charter as well. So it is very much three parties coming together, the applicant themselves, the card networks, and the department together to make this a successful project.
Well, Melissa, I think that's a really nice way to round this out. Thank you and James for joining me today, and thanks to our audience for listening to today's episode. Don't forget to visit our blog, troutmanfinancialservices.com, and subscribe so you can get the latest updates. Please make sure to also subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Stitcher, or whatever platform you use. We look forward to next time.
Copyright Troutman Pepperlock, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman does not make any representations or warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepperlock. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.